Welcome to Cojones Icons. And today, yes, I say it every single time, I'm an impersonator's dream. It is a very special guest. And today really is a very special guest. I've got former EastEnders hard man. In fact, real life hard man, in my opinion, and probably yours. It is the lovely, and he is a great guy. We've just had a chat for 5 minutes. Ross Kemp.
Nice to meet you. How are you?
Ross, lovely to see you. Well, listen, it's great to have you, and I'm very grateful to you. Here we are, by the way. As you can see, this beautiful scenery. It is raining, very English, because we're on the river.
We're on the Thames, in fact.
On the Thames, right, where, well, the hotel is the Complete Angler here in Henley, or is it Marlow?
Marlow.
Marlow, I beg your pardon. He's the local, not me. Ross, I can say that it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to speak to you. Of course, you're very well known. Nowadays, even better known, perhaps, for your unbelievable real-life documentaries. I just wanted to ask you, first of all, how did that transition happen? I mean, how did the job from being one of the most well-known soap actors on TV to doing these kind of really dangerous documentaries?
I was working for EastEnders for 10 years, and I got given a contract to work for ITV for 4 years. So I left EastEnders, working as an actor for ITV, and in the process of doing that, I had a lot more time on my hands because I wasn't working every day. You work virtually every day when you were at L Street. And in those days you did. I'm sure you work even harder now. So I had time on my hands, and a good friend of mine I know was asked to present a documentary about America's affection for firearms. It's in the Constitution. There's a lot of guns, as we know, in America. Bear in mind, this was nearly 20 years ago, and not much has changed, sadly, as we know, with all the recent shootings that we've seen in the United States of America. So I know that he'd been asked, and about 4 other people had been asked, but this was before the internet really had taken grip and before mobile phones. So my landline rang one day, and someone rang me up and said, "Ross, you're the first person we thought of for this idea of doing a documentary about guns in America," which I knew to be untrue, but it didn't matter. I was rather bored. I like to be busy. So I did this documentary. In the process of making this documentary, I met a guy called Bloodhound, who was in the Bloods. In those days, I think many people knew who the Bloods and the Crips were, but they were the biggest street gangs in the US. Came out of LA. And this particular guy had been shot 26 times, I was told, to which I said, that's bullshit, and no one could be shot 26 times and survive. Met him, got on very well with him, had to ask him the question. He lifted his top up, he'd been cranked open twice. He'd taken 6 bullets in his chest, and maybe more than that, I can't remember. At one point while he was on the ground, they'd pulled the trigger. The bullet had split his tongue, exited by his nostril, re-entered over the arch of his eye, and lodged in the top of his forehead. And he was, treated like a god locally, and admired by people because of the fact that he'd survived so many times. He'd been shot 6 times across the groin when he was selling weed when he was a kid, lost a testicle, but he still had 2 kids, of which he was very proud. But I thought that he was the antithesis of what I was seeing on MTV at the time, and in the movies, and in a lot of rap records. He didn't have a Ferrari, he didn't have lots of gold bling, he certainly didn't have a supermodel wife. He had a very lovely, large wife with 2 kids on either hip. He had a block toilet, and for most of his time, while he was breathing, he was scared because he didn't know what point there was going to be a drive-by. And I thought, if we could make a program that exposed what the reality of being a gangster was like, rather than the glamorous image that's being presented in the movies and on rap records or rap videos in those days, showing my age. Rap videos is not a word that you hear very often these days. So I thought, if we could show the reality and the poverty of where it really originated from, then we'd be doing a service to the public, because they were being sort of fooled into believing that a gangster lifestyle was particularly glamorous. But it may be for the hip-hop guys, but it certainly wasn't for the boys in those days who were living in Compton, because they were living with death on the streets every day. Well,
here's the thing, because you obviously offered the role to present these documentaries in some extremely dangerous places with some extremely dangerous people. Did you think twice or 3 times or 4 times about I've got a family here. This is dangerous stuff.
But at the time, I didn't have a family, and also it was my idea. So one thing you'll always remind yourself when you head down the ditch and the bullets are whizzing over your head is you've got no one else to blame but yourself. So if you're going to expose yourself to a risk, and bear in mind, it's not like we just don't turn up at an airport and go, well, let's spin a bottle and see where we're going to go. You know, there is a heck of a lot of planning. We use, people who have been in the intelligence services, who have now work in the independent services to help us with information about where we're going, to make sure that we control the risks that we're exposed to. A lot of times when you see those dangerous things we may have been sitting on our backsides for 7 days, 8 days before something happens that's of interest, whether it be, kinetic and gunfire, or whether it just be a threat. The most important thing for me is that we leave the place that we've visited in the same state as when we arrived. And so the people that we interview, the families that we spend time with, that they've not been exposed to any retribution that may occur after we leave. So that for me is the primary thing, and also the major thing, I guess, for the team that is a very close-knit team that has organically come together over 16 years, is that, there was no film ever worth making that was worth someone's life. And, we've been in quite perilous situations, and people have been nearly kidnapped. We've been in lots of, most of the time it's actually road traffic collisions that are the main way that people are going to get hurt. It's not necessarily gunfire or.
But I did see, I certainly remember once when you had 2 guns pointed in your direction. And I have to say the way you handled it was just quite remarkable. I mean, are you someone who is fearless?
No, not at all. I was definitely wetting myself as much as anybody else would be in that situation, mainly because we were thousands of miles from anyone that could have possibly helped us had any of us been wounded. If any of us had even been stabbed, and there were more guys with spears than there were with guns, and I know the shotgun was probably viable. I wasn't sure about the rifle. And, the other thing that I always point out is that my cameraman is the most bravest man at that moment, not me. I am reacting to a threat that is coming at me. He's carrying on rolling, and he's looking for a matchbox in black and white. So, Jonathan Young, very good, trusted friend of mine, I've been to Iraq, Syria with, I've been to Afghanistan countless times with, and around the world, Congo, DRC, particularly when the ethnic violence was happening there, was some of the worst violence I've ever been exposed to. He kept a cool head and carried on filming. Now, he had a gun pointed at his back as well at the same time. And he could have had a spear stuck in him or a knife. These people were, they've been smoking some of the strongest marijuana in the world, and they were chewing betel nut, which is quite strong stuff. Yeah.
That's what you take.
I know about the way I handled it. I mean, the most important thing is they told us to go down on our knees. And I thought, if we go down on our hands and knees, we are being compliant at this point. If we're compliant at this point, who knows what can happen.
Were you briefed beforehand?
We were told that we didn't know that these guys were going to do what they were going to do, but we told that you're going to meet people who are violent under the influence of drugs. Anything can happen. And you get better at dealing with it the more you do it.
So where did you get the courage from? Because would you say that you're generally a very self-confident person? I mean,
my team has said that at certain points, I only heard this, that they normally belittle me and barrack me at every point, and that's part of the humour that you need to survive in extreme situations. They said that sometimes, occasionally, the confidence has got us through, but that is a combined confidence that we know that we can totally rely on each other. I know the family of the people that I work with, but it's a team courage.
I know your father was a policeman.
Yeah.
Did you learn any of that stuff? How the best way to disarm?
No, of course not.
To build rapport.
He was a very good. Apparently, he was a detective superintendent in the Met, and he was mainly a homicide detective, though he was in the Regional Crime Squad in the Sweeney. He has never spoken to me about what he did. I think he was in the army before that. He's never spoken to me about that. We have a very good relationship, but he's always viewed that part of his life as not something that he really wanted to talk about. And so I've let it ride. And he's still alive. He's 80 years old now. So no, we've never really discussed that.
So when that happened, you had the gun pointed at you, you were scared?
Yeah, of
You
course.
admit to being scared. Were you scared regularly doing filming for that show, regardless of the fact that you were all together?
I think you know, if you're not scared about the fact that bullets are whizzing over your head, then there's something wrong with you. But it's about being able, the more situations like that occur, being able to second guess or judge how exposed you are. And
so what do you say to yourself, Ross, in those situations? Because Cojones, which is the ultimate title of this series, it's about being ballsy, it's about being courageous. And part of that is self-talk. What were you saying to yourself in those situations to calm yourself, to go through it?
I think, for instance, in an ambush, the first time I said it, I recited a childhood prayer about 15 times and then thought, why the fuck haven't we started firing back? And in that time, because the guy had already asked me whether I was dead or not, and that's a sense of humour that you cookie went, Kemp, are you alive? And afterwards, you laugh like you've never laughed. And there is a bonding moment of human relief.
Yeah.
And that's happened whether I've been with colleagues who are female or male. And that draws you tighter as well. So, I don't think I'm an adrenaline junkie, but there was a definite time in my life before I had the obligations that I have now in terms of wives and children, where I was freshly divorced and I lived to just get on that plane and go out virtually to go anywhere I could go.
So you now think twice more about it?
No, not at all. Because if you do, it's like playing sport. You said you did taekwondo. Yeah. If you hesitate before you go in on any physical kind of sport, you're going to come off second best.
Of course.
So you put yourself in the mindset before you leave that you're going off to a hostile environment. And, my wife knows that when the boots and the bag with the body armour comes out, I'm going off to somewhere that could be kinetic and it could be dangerous.
Does she try and put you off?
No, of course not. She didn't know who Grant Mitchell was, not Phil Mitchell, by the way, unless that was a joke.
Sorry, did I say Phil Mitchell?
But it doesn't matter. But the point is, she was never exposed. That's right. She was never really exposed to the EastEnders times. So when I was introduced to her, she was on her way back to Australia to work in a partnership, a lawyers' partnership in Australia, and for whatever misguided reason, she decided to stay. So she's only ever known me going off and coming back in one piece, hopefully, touch wood. And that's the way that we live a life, and I enjoy it. And there's a shelf life to how long you can do that kind of stuff.
So, and it's interesting because you went from, if you like, non-reality hard man to, some people would say, reality hard man to doing those shows. And although you say
I certainly did it the wrong way around. I should have been running around ditches when I was in my 20s, not when I was in my late 30s, early 40s. But yeah, that's the way it is. And I wouldn't, change it, because the experiences that I've had both as an actor when I was younger, were fantastic. It was a great time to be in a program like that, as I say, because of the audience that it generated and the fun that I had, and hopefully the work that I did. But also, I wanted to travel. For 10 years, I drove up to Elstree and back every day, virtually, and sat in traffic, and then did my job and spent more time with my fake family than I did with my real family. Not that I didn't like my fake family. So this job that I do now allows me to spend time with my family, but also I get to travel around the world, meet incredibly interesting people, and have a few interesting experiences as well.
And the other thing that you seem to have encountered doing that series is obviously the stark reality of the darkness in the world. I mean, there's obviously a lot of light. How did you, and I think people could learn from you in this respect, because when you're seeing what you see, it is depressing. But did it have a depressing effect on you, or did you all of a sudden raise your awareness of your own gratitude?
I would say that I'm far more of an optimist now, having travelled the world and met so many human beings. And, I am, the one thing we used to say about Afghanistan, because bear in mind, we wouldn't do what the soldiers did, because we're not soldiers. We wouldn't do a 6-month tour, but we'd go and do 2 months, probably every year. And that was enough for me, I have to be honest. I could be, within the time of leaving the front line virtually, I'd fly back to Bastion, or I'd fly onto Kandahar, and I could be home within 7 hours. Be in a car going down the M40 and be in a taxi going down the Earls Court Road. And that used to sometimes be very freakish. What was the point of the question? Why was I saying that?
Well, in terms of the fact that you've seen so much darkness in the
world.
Yeah,
sorry. So you could see that darkness, and then you'd be back walking into a pub or into Tesco's or into Sainsbury's, let's be fair. It was probably Marks and Spencer's. And buying a ready meal, throwing it in the microwave and going, 24 hours ago, I was being shot at. I was watching children get blown up.
Yeah.
And that is that's a hard stretch sometimes. But my faith in human beings is this, I'd see people on that motorway after coming out off that TriStar, after being on that C-130, after being on that Chinook, getting out of there. And there'd be people screaming at each other because they were in traffic, or knocking into each other with those trolleys in that supermarket and getting very, very angry with each other.
Yeah.
And then I'd been in a village with a load of Afghans 2 days before that at Ashura, where they had virtually no food. Their lives were in constant danger. They didn't know what would happen the next hour, let alone the next morning. And they were incredibly happy. I've been in villages where people have just, come very close to being wiped out by an opposing tribe during ethnic cleansing. And they would give you the last drop of water that they had. They would burn the last log they had to keep them warm, so you would be warm as well. And that kind of humanity, I find sometimes overwhelming when I come home, because I see how selfish we have become because we have so much.
So it's interesting what it's done for you, and perhaps people watching this, is how important that word gratitude is. Because, of course, as they say, happiness won't make you grateful. It's gratitude that will make you happy. And you've learnt that, haven't you?
I think so. I think I often forget, like every other human being.
Yeah.
I think I used to make all these kind of promises to myself, particularly when I came back from Afghan, that I would be a better person, more patient. And then within 3 months of being a rat on the wheel again, I was screaming at everyone in Tesco's and trying to jump the traffic lights. So, I think that you have to be realistic about how you're going to change your life and how you're going to approach changes, because we're under I think we live under very different pressures to our forefathers. We haven't got the Second World War and the First World War.
Of course.
But we also are still fighting our own, the competition now for young people, particularly even to get a mortgage. It's just horrendous. And, I worry what the future for my kids is going to be like.
Sure. And of course, you've been through a massive journey with the documentaries, with being one of the most famous faces on British TV. Mm. And you come across very humble, which is a tenet, which is a quality.
About that.
And well, there you go. Don't about that.
Thanks very much.
Yeah. But for the people out there,
is that a British curse, being humble?
Sorry,
you think that's a British curse, being humble?
There's nothing wrong with humility or confidence, but then there's a fine line which takes over the edge to becoming arrogance. Yeah. And that's the difference. I think.
Yeah.
Would you agree?
Yeah. I mean, I've encountered. I think, and sometimes it depends on your day what you decide is arrogance and what you decide is confidence. Yeah.
Well, we all go through state changes, but for the people out there, Ross, to them, you are an icon of, I would say, cojones, but you are an icon. You are an icon. I don't know the of icon courage, of someone who, as you said, have been a light for humanity from what you've seen, and I would presume that you realise that we're all human, and therefore you can tell people something about how they can learn from this, live their lives, do things, take action in order to achieve the goals that they want, like you have.
Oh, but I would suggest that most of the things that the way that it's unfolded mainly has been through luck. It's not necessarily been through design. I think the fact that moving from predominantly acting to going into documentary making was a mishap, but I found it was something that I really enjoyed, and I've always been more of a team player than I've been an individual. So I love the idea of that kind of close-knit team working together to strive for a common goal, which is to make the best possible documentary that we can. And acting in some ways sometimes is a very individual. It's a great company feeling when you're working as a company, but then that play finishes or that TV show finishes, and then you're out there struggling on your own now to get the next job.
Sure.
Whereas when I was working predominantly, which I'm hopefully going to carry on doing, but who knows in this world, It's very much a team effort. That I love that kind of working together for a common goal.
And in terms of a message, if you like, based on your experience, you are humble, but people can learn from you. I know they do say that luck is the meeting of preparation and opportunity. So
I think you have to prepare, and you have to be opportunist. When an opportunity presents itself, you must grab it with both hands, and you've got to be aware enough to know when that opportunity is presenting itself. But at the same time, I said to you, the one thing that I wish I'd done more when I was developing, if I have developed, was to listen, and that's something that I tried to watch, even in my own self, because they're everything, whether it's Facebook or Twitter or all the other apps that are out there. It's all about presenting an image to the world of who I want to be perceived as. And for me, I'm not really interested in that much anymore. I'm more interested in listening and learning as much as I possibly can do while I'm here.
Well, I think that is a fantastic message, actually, Ross. I'm very grateful for you to be here. If I've hurried it up, I apologise. Ross has another engagement, of course.
The school run.
He's got the school run. And, of course, if I did, by accident, call him Phil Mitchell. In fact, I want to ask you a slightly sort of tongue-in-cheek question.
Yeah,
who is harder, Grant Mitchell or Phil Mitchell?
Definitely Phil Mitchell.
Definitely Phil. Well, that is humility, if ever I've heard it. Before we go, it is the crackerjack moment of the Cojones Icons series, of course. So
I hope you're not going to kick me in the cojones.
No. We have here, of course. I don't like to undo it, but I will.
Go on, buddy.
It is, of course, the metaphorical steel balls for the man who does have steel balls, even if he argues that he doesn't. Believe me, he does, because most people wouldn't do what he does. But of course, this is even more profound, of course. I always thought, as Ross was the TV half man, he'd be an extra large. So I've got you an extra large, so you can fit his muscular frame into it, of course. And it is the special edition Cojones T-shirt, which he will wear on his next shoot in Afghanistan.
Wherever I am. Very proud to wear it. There you go.
Ross, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm very grateful to be here.
Thank you.
Lovely to see you.
Really nice to meet you, mate.